So hi, and welcome to Nurturing Consent Culture, the event that's part of the International Festival of Consent 2020, where we're talking about how we can encourage our children and young people to engage with consent and consent culture. I'm Jenny Wilson. I'm one of the co-curators of the Festival of Consent, together with Kitty Stryker. I'm also the founder of the International Day of Consent, which is on the 30th of November. I'm a performing artist, and I'm a mum of a 9-year-old girl and a 24-year-old even boy, man now, in fact, at 24. He would be very upset if he's still my little boy, but that's how it goes. Anyway, so those are some of the hats that I've got on for this conversation. And on our panel, I'm going to let them introduce themselves now. Grainne, would you like to start?
Yeah, happy to. Hello, everybody, and thanks for being here. I'm really looking forward to this discussion myself, to be honest. It's always great to have a whole bunch of consent geeks in a room together, and it's lovely to realise that we're all in different parts of the world to come together to have these chats and these discussions. So I'm living in Ireland. Hello, everybody from Ireland, and I co-creator of an organisation called Consent Matters Ireland, which started about 3 or 4 years ago now. I have been sort of immersing myself in the study of consent probably for about 5 years or 6 years now at this point. Particularly keen on the model of consent called the Wheel of Consent, developed by an amazing American woman called Betty Martin. And really enjoying seeing how becoming more familiar and more aware and more comfortable with noticing my boundaries and expressing my boundaries has really had a huge impact on so many elements of my life. And now I'm spending quite a bit of time sort of spreading the good news in relation to consent and how important it is in all aspects of our life. In a variety of different ways. So working with people in 3rd level education, in high school, 2nd level education as well. And just simply working too with adults who are realizing that it's about time that we all start becoming much more aware of our personal boundaries in a personal and in a professional context, and how to gain the confidence and the skills to be able to communicate those boundaries effectively. So yeah, that's me, and I'm really looking forward to being involved here. And thanks for the invitation, Jenny.
Thank you, Grainne. Heather, would you like to go next?
Sure. Greetings from cold, overcast Chicago. I'm also excited. I love talking about consent with a bunch of people. I've been in education. I've been teaching for about 30 years now. I started in early childhood, and for about the last 25 years, I've been solidly in sexuality and relationships education, mostly with adolescents and young adults. I founded and continue to direct the web clearinghouse Scarleteen, which is one of the first online sex ed sites that existed. We slog along year after year to stay here, writing about and talking about and teaching people about consent is one of our absolute favorite things to do on there. Certainly watching how conversations about consent with our user base over the last 20 some years have changed and evolved has also been really interesting. So that's me. Thank you for having me here.
Thank you, Heather. And Heidi.
Hi. Oh gosh, that's a good start. Hi, my name is Heidi. I'm coming at you live from Yorkshire, God's own country. And I am an autistic ADHD adult. I work for myself through a program called the Unstoppable Woman program. I'm the Unstoppable Woman. My program is called the Unstoppables program, and I coach people, particularly neurodivergent people, so people with autism or people who are autistic or ADHD or Tourette's or sensory processing disorder or dyslexia or dysgraphia or all of the good stuff. And I coach mainly parents in neurodivergent families around big life changes. And I support them with managing things like boundaries and self-care during that time, which is really key. I'm a mental health first aider, public speaker, and I'm a mum. My daughter is 16. She's also autistic and ADHD. I'm also a performance artist. So, and I'm geeking out at the moment because I'm a massive fan of Scarleteen. So I'm like, oh my God, fangirling. So, but yeah, I'm really pleased to be here. Thank you for having me.
Great, thank you, Heidi. Just a quick apology to anyone who was expecting to see the wonderful Becky Howson here today from Baby Brain UK. Amongst us, we do have some parents and some experience around babies and early years, but Becky was our specialist in that, and due to one of her own children having some urgent health needs, was unable to join us today. But I think you'll agree we have an excellent panel in Grainne, Heather and Heidi. I'm going to speak a little bit, first of all, myself about how I feel about nurturing consent culture, and then I'm going to invite each of the others to offer their provocation, and then we're going to open out into a discussion. So for me, nurturing consent culture is a lot about teaching agency, autonomy, and choice to our children. And that, as a parent, is very, very different from how I was parented. I'm 49 years old, my parents are in their 80s. And I was parented and schooled with a great deal of coercion in the kinds of practices that were used to control me and to keep me in line and to get me to behave. Children should be seen and not heard. Nice girls don't. Many things like that. And I think that kind of use of shaming and pride, as well as the flip side of that, and punishing bad behaviour, working with absolutes of what's right and what's wrong, is hugely difficult in terms of what's actually consensual. I think that for me, justice, the process of justice, is not about punishment or even reward, but is more about compassionate justice, about how we learn to balance our own freedom to use our agency, our autonomy, our consent, with our own sense of responsibility and accountability. And I know that, you know, my 9-year-old girl will often say to me, "It's not fair, why am I not allowed?" at me. And it's really hard not to fall into the traditional response of "because I said so," because that's what my parents taught me. But to actually then enter into using curiosity and empathy to navigate those parenting conundrums and ask her, well, you know, if that's the thing you want and I want this thing, how are we going to move forward here? What solutions can we come up with together? It's incredibly difficult and time consuming, and I'm learning as much as she's learning from this process of trying to parent more consensually. My 24-year-old son had less consensual parenting from me because I was less mindful about those things back then. And that's interesting in itself as well. I think it's also important for me to just touch on, just in case anyone is not fully familiar with it, that when I'm talking about consent, I am operating with the Fry's model as my kind of checklist framework for navigating consent. And that's the model that, I'll run through it really quickly because we've talked about it lots during these 2 weeks of the festival. So Fry's comes from Planned Parenthood in America, and the acronym stands for freely given. So, you know, are you genuinely free to consent, or are you being coerced? Is there peer pressure? Is there some other reason that you're not fully free and have full capacity to consent to what's going on. R is for reversible. You can consent to something, but then go, actually, I changed my mind. I don't want to continue. I no longer give my consent for this. I is informed. You understand fully what it is you're consenting to, and you have all the information you need about the risks and challenges and problems that might come from consenting to this thing. E in Planned Parenthood's model is for enthusiastic. I don't like enthusiastic consent because I think that a lot of times consent is fully present without being enthusiastic. And my simplest example is going to the dentist. I am never enthusiastic about going to the dentist. However, I make an active and engaged, yes, go ahead, drill my teeth. I know it's good for me. So I use the word E, the letter E, for engaged rather than enthusiastic. It's that connected, definite, it's the yes rather than the absence of no. So E is engaged, and S is specific. That consent is specific to a particular situation, a particular person, a particular time, a particular place. It's not universal. It's very specific and contextual to any given situation. And for me, FRIES applies across the consent we give ourselves inside our own heads. So the permission we give ourselves to do things, the things we deny ourselves, and the things that we allow ourselves to do. It operates at the interpersonal, in intimate personal relationships, one-to-one, in small groups, in families, at the level of that sort of interpersonal negotiation. It operates at the level of groups, so in the workplace, in a social setting, in peer groups or interest groups or clubs and societies or those kinds of situations. And it operates at a socio-cultural level. So the socioeconomic global system that we're in. And those things are conflicting a lot of the time. And in fact, a lot of them are very unconsensual and extremely coercive. The context, the culture that we sit in is a culture of entitlement where people have privileges and hierarchies, and we are not all fully free to give the consent that we would like to in any given situation. So the absence of consent is very often a context that we're operating in, and therefore we can't do it perfectly. It's really just not as simple as yes means yes and no means no. So I just thought that that bit of contextualizing might be really useful. I can see all the other speakers are nodding, that they kind of seem to be concurring with that as at least a context, as a setting for a conversation around what we mean when we say we're nurturing consent culture. And for me, that is about nurturing a socio-economic culture, or a group culture, or a culture in a school or in a family, where consent is central to how we operate, where we are learning to trust each other, where we are finding consensus to move forward together with whatever it is we want to do. I think that's probably enough waffling on for me, and I'd like to invite Heather, if that's okay, to speak first. Thank you.
Thank you. You know, I'm going to do a thing that might seem a little bit weird. I'd like to kind of talk a little bit about the fact that so often the first real education that people get, you know, still in 2020 when it comes to consent is in sex ed. And I'm going to complain about that a little, not because I don't like to teach consent. I love to teach consent, and I certainly love to teach consent in the context of sex. I love to hash that out with the people that we talk to really get in the finer points of that and to help them learn to do that when it comes to sexual interactions and relationships. But I also think that there's a lot of reasons that it's really not great, that sex education is often the only place where people get consent education. And so I want to kind of talk about some of the reasons why I think that that's a problem. I mean, one of the biggest is that I think that sends the message that consent is only for sex, rather than being about all of our social interactions. I mean, literally all of our interactions and our sexual interactions, instead of our sexual interactions and maybe some other things, right? It's for all of these things, and it's there's no one place where it starts, right? And there's no one central place that consent is relevant, and then kind of satellites, where it's, sure, we kind of need it here, we equally need it everywhere. And I think that sometimes that when that education is only in sex ed, that message is lost, or even, a different message is sent. Than that, I think another one that's particularly tricky is that so many people don't get sex education at all. If they get it, they often won't get it until later in life, until maybe, if they're lucky, middle school, more, high school, secondary education, university, college education. If they don't get it there, they're seeking it out themselves, when their teens are in their early 20s. And if you've waited that long to get consent education, one, so much non-consensual behavior and interactions is baked in, right? If we're not giving people consent education from birth, moving forward, but instead it happens now, not only are we having to teach people how this goes, we're having to do a bunch of kind of remedial and corrective education. We're having people for whom non-consent, both people not engaging them with their consent and them not engaging with other people's consent, is super normalized. If somebody's only getting this information when they're 16, there have been so many violations of consent, kind of on both sides of that it's very difficult, I think, then for people to learn it. Sometimes we wind up in the situation where then it happens on this continuum where we're talking about what's consensual enough, which is obviously not great. That's not really the framework that we want to have this happen in. Then we've counseled, quite a lot of young people that when they also get this education later, they've realized that they have violated people's consent, sometimes that they've sexually assaulted someone. And so then, someone has to deal with that, with holding that and working through that and all of these things. And the fact that they didn't know doesn't change what they have to emotionally carry from all of that and the work that they have to do, especially if, as it often is the case, they're still in those relationships. So it's not just even their own work that they have to fix and their own feelings and their own behaviors. They've got relationships that sometimes they're repairable, sometimes not so much, depending on what's going on. Some other pieces is that sex is a really loaded context to learn about consent in, and to be doing your, kind of practice trial runs about consent. It's a lot easier to practice consent with borrowing books from the library, or taking turns at the water fountain than asking to play with somebody's toy than it is to ask to have sex with somebody else, and so not only are people having to figure this out in very high stakes situations, emotional high stakes, physical high stakes, social high stakes, they're also having to learn when usually they're nervous about things, they're self-conscious about things. We certainly exist in a culture that's normalized the lack of communication effects, so people will often even feel self-conscious trying to communicate at all during sexual behavior. Often it's harder to kind of get the other person to cooperate with you, especially if they haven't had any education about this. So that's a big one. I think, another thing that happens is that when consent education is something that people have only gotten in sex ed, a lot of sex ed is unfortunately still very binary and very mired in, traditional gender roles. And so even when people are getting consent education in sex ed, a lot of the time who gets left out in that are boys. Right. So boys will come out of that thinking that they have a responsibility to get consent, but nowhere in there will they have heard that anyone that engages in them has a responsibility to engage with their consent and to get their permission for things as well. What else? I mean, I think the other big thing is that if we're coming to consent late, when people are already starting to have intimate relationships and interactions, then they've already started those relationships and interactions without, I think some of the things you spoke to really well, Jenny, without a sense of personal autonomy, without a real sense of agency, without good communication skills that make it most likely that those social interactions and relationships that they have are healthy ones, and that they can be healthy people in them and make things that are beneficial. So, I mean, like I said, I'm not voting to be like, I don't want this job anymore. Like, I'm perfectly happy to keep giving consent education and sex ed, but what a different environment it would be if this wasn't the first time that someone was getting it, and it wasn't only in this context. That's me. I will mute and pass the baton.
Thank you, Heather. That's really, really useful input. I'm going to pass on to Grainne next for your provocation. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Some really interesting points you both brought up there. I'm particularly drawn to a metaphor that I use when talking about the idea of, introducing people to the concept of consent only relating to sexual consent, and only by the time they're sort of mid to late teens. To me, it just seems like, giving people the key to a Ferrari to learn to drive, when really you need to start off on your, your small 1-liter car or something. We need to be ensuring that our children are dipping their toe into the waters of consensual awareness and consensual education right from the get-go. And that's even before, obviously, that they arrive at school, in my opinion. But certainly, if we leave the consent conversation to the point where everything else, hormones, heightened emotions, lack of confidence, lack of self-esteem, are all in the mix, and it is such an emotive conversation to have, we're doing our young people such a disservice, because what we need to, I suppose, experience and to have for them and with them is that by the time they get to that point where they're sashaying into a conversation with somebody about something sexual, that they already have had, years, hopefully, of experience of understanding the concepts of what consent really is. And so, yeah, I guess what I'd like to speak about really is about, we talk about consent as if it's a thing, it's one word, as if it's, you're either in consent or you're not. But for me, it's like a whole set of skills that you need to get. It's like a funnel that brings you to that consensual situation where you're getting a yes or a no. But what has to happen in advance of getting to that consensual situation is a whole list, I think, of life skills that need to be learned that we don't really talk about a whole lot when we're talking about, teaching our children or guiding our children in a particular way. So I guess I want to talk a little bit about that. What are those core skills that we need to learn and to teach and to model for our children, so that they get to a point where they understand what being consensually aware is in terms of their own consent and boundaries, and also being able to pick up on nuances and consent when it comes to other people in all sorts of contexts. Again, not limiting it to sexual contexts, but also just, in the playground in general, communicating with their siblings, communicating with mum and dad, communicating with granny or auntie or whoever, and communicating even with teachers and other people in positions of authority. So I guess for me, the whole thing is that really we're out of consent, and these are, things that we really speak a lot of when we talk in sort of the Betty Martin school of consent, so to speak. We talk a lot about the idea that you're out of consent from the moment that you're born. People are, picking you up and putting you down. They're deciding when you're feeding very often and when you're not, when you're sleeping, when you're going to school, when you're not going to school, when you're playing, when you're not. So we learned from a very, very early age, really, that our opinion in terms of what boundaries we would like are really kind of maybe sometimes irrelevant, or certainly lack the importance of the positions or considerations of those people who are in authority. So power dynamic in relation to consent starts from a really, really early age. And certainly we're all taught that when it comes to the power dynamic between us and our parents, have the final say and the final answer. And of course, that's valuable and necessary. Being the animals that we are, we're in need of parental care and attention for much, much longer than any other animal, on this planet. We need to have parental guidance and parental care for until well into our teens. There's certainly a TED talk out there, Jill Bolt Taylor, that says keep them alive until they're 25, that our brains aren't fully formed until we're 25. So that until that point, we're not really in our full capacity to make good and the right decisions, I suppose, for ourselves. So we're taught, I suppose, from an early age that maybe our consent isn't necessary or needed or even asked for. And certainly their schooling systems would certainly sort of hammer that home in its own way, particularly in terms of you have to be in class on time, you have to do your homework, you have to wear appropriate clothes, you have to, you're taught basically to be very, very structured. And of course, that's what society needs us to do in certain situations. We need to have a capacity to follow rules, to follow the etiquette of society, to follow what our culture tells us is appropriate and right. But I think we need to kind of take it back a step and kind of say, well, what's really important is that each individual is fully aware of their own capacity for autonomy and our own capacity to make decisions and our own capacity for choice. And in teaching that from a very early age onwards, we're empowering our children, I suppose, to, as I would call it, sort of grow your consent muscle, to know when you're in consent within yourself and when you're not, and to also be able to read other people to see whether or not they're in consent or not. Because for me, consent is really an embodied experience. It's not just about having a logic capacity to kind of say, am I okay with this or am I not? There's also an embodied experience, and we kind of have a good sense and can kind of get a sense as to whether, am I getting tense? Am I getting worked up? Am I getting a little bit edgy around this? Am I in consent or am I not? Am I feeling at ease? Am I feeling relaxed? Am I feeling in my flow? So that certainly would be something that I think that it would be really important in terms of starting from teaching our small children. How are you feeling in your body around this thing? Are you in consent within your body or not? So I suppose, to talk a little bit about what are the core learnings or core teachings that I think we need to have when it comes to consent, and teaching our children about consent. It is about, I think, sort of noticing, valuing, trusting, and communicating our own personal boundaries. So noticing when we hit up against a boundary, trusting that is valid and that there's a value there, that it's okay for us all to have our personal boundaries and to give ourselves permission to have personal boundaries around certain things, and then to feel confident in being able to express those to other people. And so that, I suppose, is the balance that parents find a little bit challenging. How to give, enough autonomy and enough power to our child so that they start to have that growth in that capacity to feel whether they're in consent or not, and yet at the same time to safeguard them and to mind them. So, it's that whole challenge, as a friend and colleague, Sarah Sproul, spoke about, who has this great website called the talk.ie about teaching parents about how to communicate effectively with their kids around sex and consent and those sort of things. And she talks about that juxtaposition between trying to get the screaming, wriggling 2-year-old into their car seat whilst needing to leave immediately because you have another child that you need to take to the doctor, and how do you balance consent and that conversation, so it's about finding that balance, in terms of having consensual agreements with your children. It's also, I suppose, about being aware, having our children having that awareness that consent is an embodied experience. When, how do I feel? Am I feeling that I'm in consent with this? Am I feeling that I'm a hell yes? Or am I feeling that I'm a barely wanting to? Am I barely willing to? Am I right on the edge of my boundary? Or am I a fully embodied, expressive, yes, I want to do this. I'm an absolute hell yes for this. Yeah. So it's about noticing how we feel. And in that, and then having that sort of a better sense of noticing how we feel within ourselves, I feel that there's then a capacity to be able to be more empathic with other people. So if we know when we're in and out of consent in our own experience, we have a better ability and an awareness to be able to assess the other person. Are they in or out of consent too? So yeah, understanding that variance between willing to and want to, what does that look like? What does that feel like? What does that sound like with ourselves and with others? Giving ourselves permission to be able to say yes to what we want and to be able to ask for what we want with integrity. Giving ourselves permission to have a no and to be able to say no. Giving ourselves permission to be able to negotiate and to learn those skills of negotiation. And also being able to change our minds and allowing ourselves and giving ourselves permission to change our minds and to be able to voice that change of mind. Again, another sort of skill that I think we need to be focusing on. Understanding that our needs and our wants are different from, desire. We might desire something, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we have to have it and that we're going to get it. We may want something, but we may not necessarily get it, and understanding that it's okay to have that differentiation. That's, I think, an important differentiation to teach our children. Having a confidence in being able to clearly ask for what you want without an expectation that the person is then obligated to give you a yes. So being okay and comfortable with asking for something, but also being able to be comfortable with getting rejection and being able to deal with that without having an absolute decimation of our self-esteem. Because very often what happens, particularly amongst younger people, but I suppose it happens at all age groups, is that if we're afraid to ask for what we want, very often we'll take what we want without asking in the first place. So, and that really happens around sexual assault in a lot of situations. If people are not feeling comfortable and confident that they can, within integrity, ask for what they want, they'll instead sort of sidestep the asking in the first place. So dealing with rejection, I think, is a hugely important skill that comes within that context of being consensual within relationships with other people. Awareness at age appropriate levels of your right to have choice in every situation. So again, you might not be giving your 5-year-old choice in every situation, but you're much more likely to be giving your 16 or 17-year-old a choice in situations. Yeah, so that for me is sort of, in a very long, sort of winded nutshell, what is necessary. So that consent is not just a one word, do you have permission or not? It's an active, ongoing discussion. And it involves a whole lot of skills that need to be taught in playful, empathic ways, right from early childhood onwards, to build that consent muscle and that consent confidence in all of our young people, and all the way through, obviously, to adulthood as well. So that's my piece on it. Thanks for the time.
Thank you. That's great. Working on our consent muscles, definitely an exercise at any age to continue working on. Over to Heidi now. Heidi, would you like to?
Will you wave at me if I do like 25 minutes? Is that okay? I'm not good at timekeeping.
I will. I'll wave at you if I feel like you're going on a bit long. Yeah.
So I really wanted to talk about consent in education specifically. And I'm going to share from personal experience. And I have got permission from my daughter to talk about this. So as I mentioned earlier, I'm autistic ADHD. My daughter is also autistic ADHD. She's 16. We both came quite late to that realization. This is something that, if you'd asked us 2 years ago, neither of us knew that we were neurodivergent. And the wheels came off quite spectacularly for us as a family, where she wasn't able to deal with the school environment any longer. And that was because no adjustments had been made for her, because we didn't know that she had particular needs, particularly around sensory things. So what we know now is that very loud environments, very busy environments, because she's autistic, are a real sensory overload for her. So the volume's turned up on all of her senses a lot of the time. And it gets very overwhelming, and because of her neurology, and mine too, it kind of pushes her into shutdown and burnout. And so we didn't know this, but we do now. But what I wanted to talk about was the impact of kind of particularly mainstream education here in the UK, and how non-consensual that is for our young people, particularly our neurodivergent young people. And, my kind of provocation is kind of what Grainne was saying, and also what Heather touched on, is that education actually, as a culture, is not consensual. And it's particularly true for neurodivergent kids. So, for example, Tilly attends an academy, which is an independently run but mainstream school. We have a lot of academies here in the UK. And they have very strict policies on things like uniform, behaviour, attendance. So for kids like Tilly, who find it really challenging to be in corridors with lots of kids, and they're arriving in a classroom and they're deregulated, and for Tilly, she's kind of quite anxious. She also experiences selective mutism, which is basically linked to her anxiety, whereby in very stressful situations she loses the ability to speak for herself. So and you might have experienced that if you've had a really extreme emotional reaction to something, because sometimes you can't feel the words. Often autistic kids especially are experiencing anxiety linked to sensory overwhelm, and it shuts down the language part of their brain in that moment. So you'll have a child like Tilly arriving in a classroom feeling very anxious, feeling very deregulated, and they'll be asked a question by the teacher and can't respond. And because they don't respond, they get a behaviour mark for being disrespectful or not listening or being fidgety. And so then she'll get into her seat and she's already got a behaviour point for not listening. And then she'll be fiddling with something. So she'll get another behaviour point for fiddling with something because she's got ADHD. And then she'll get another behaviour point for looking out the window and be accused of not listening, because in school, in education settings, we ask our children to look at us to show us that they're listening. Well, for a child who's autistic, that's the absolutely most painful thing you can do, because a lot of us really struggle with eye contact. We find it physically uncomfortable to meet someone's gaze. So in our case, mine and Tilly's, we listen far better when we're not looking at you. Because when we're not looking at you, we're not trying to remember to make eye contact and to not stare and to smile in all the right places and to read your face. We'd rather just not be looking at you, and then we can really listen to what you're saying. So my experience has been that as a parent of a neurodivergent child, that setting has been really disabling for her. And, as a parent of an adolescent, when I'm trying to foster consent and I'm trying to encourage her to have autonomy, and I'm also trying to advocate for her on occasions when she can't speak for herself and I've got to do that for her, having her in an environment which is all about, you behave in this way or there is a punishment or a consequence, without her consent, certainly without her informed consent, that's just the way that is. Even down to things like, so pretty common, the uniform policy at her school says that she can't have a bobble around her wrist. So for her, that is one of her very easy ways of self-regulating. She'll just flick it on her wrist, and it's a way of keeping connected with her own senses so she can concentrate on other things. But in her school, a bob around your wrist means that you're interrupting your learning and the learning of other people, because it should be in your hair or in your bag. Or, you know, her school very early banned fidget toys, so kids aren't allowed fidget toys in classes. And then when you've got a child who is desperately trying to regulate their sensory processing and all of the things that they would normally do to do that, like at home, we're like, you know, our whole house is like, there's balls of putty, there's bits of fidget toys, there's touchy-feely fabrics, there's weighted blankets on every couch. Do you know what I mean? Like, we know what we need to do. You know, we sit and we squeeze each other's wrists on a regular basis. You know, we know how to regulate, but all of those things are robbed from her in a mainstream school environment. And what kind of, I think, compounds it is that for kids who are neurodivergent, who are disabled, you know, in terms of the social model of disability rather than the medical model of disability, which means that we're disabled by our inability to operate in a world that's set up for neurotypical people rather than neurodivergent people. So we're constantly trying to fit this box that was never even built for us. That it's assumed that we're not able to or not entitled to give consent because we don't operate in the way that other people do. So it's assumed that because an autistic child, some, not all autistic people are the same, but a lot of autistic people have quite rigid thinking. So we're pretty good at yes and no. We're not so great at the bit in the middle. And those nuances and those things of kind of reading situations, often people with autism are not great at picking up social cues. We're often accused of being blunt. We're often accused of being harsh because we're like, just tell me the answer. Is it yes or no? You know, and like, oh, it's not that simple really. Well, it needs to be, because that's the way my brain works. So when we're not used to living in that space in the middle, and it's a skill that we need to develop, it's assumed that we're not capable, and it's assumed that because we don't live in that space, that our yes doesn't really mean yes and our no doesn't really mean no. And so the fallout from that is that the sex ed thing's a really good example, actually. So my daughter is pretty keyed up, pretty woke. My approach to her has always been, if she asks a question, she gets an answer. It's an honest answer, and it's a pretty autistic answer. So sometimes she maybe gets a bit more detail than maybe a non-autistic parent would give, but it's kind of, you know, in an age-appropriate way. But we've never really shied away from that. So she's having sex ed at the minute. Actually, she's been out of school for 12 months, and now she's got a place back in a hospital school with other children who are similarly challenged and need similar support. But she just happens to have dropped in right in the middle of sex ed. She's horrified. She doesn't want to touch condoms. You know, she definitely doesn't want to mess about with lube. You know, like she's like, she can't even handle cling film. Lube is her worst nightmare, you know. And so we've had to have a conversation with school that said, you just have to trust me on this. If she ever wants to be engaged in sexual activity, she knows what a condom is and she knows how to get it on. Please don't make her put it on in front of 7 other kids, and please don't make her handle lube. You know, you just have to trust me on this one. She's good for it. You know. But that thing about, she won't say that herself. She can't go to a teacher and say, I don't want to have to touch a condom, you know. So I have to advocate for her, and those things that are the assumption being that it's in the interest of the child. And it, you know, I'm not saying, like Heather was saying, I'm not saying don't teach sex ed, not for a second, but I am saying that in those environments, we're not asking our kids for consent around those things, you know. And not just neurodivergent kids, you know, kids who have never seen genitals before, and we're throwing open books with pictures of labia in front of them, and they're like, whoa, you know. And Tilly told me that there was a kid in her class when they did sex ed in her last school who threw up, you know, because he was so freaked out, God bless him, by what was being presented. And it's that thing about, we think we know what's best. So I think we really need to start asking our kids if they consent to things, and teaching them what that looks and feels like, and helping them to understand that it is okay to say, I don't want to put my fingers in that lube, thank you very much. And listen to them. So not just be like, oh, go on, you can, you know, because that's when you end up with traumatized kids who are completely freaked out by any of that stuff, or whatever the thing is. And especially autistic kids, if you traumatize an autistic child around a particular thing that's linked to a bigger thing, the whole thing is off the table, because our neurology means that we just go, that's not safe, we're not doing that again. You know, we rob them of opportunities. And I think things like behavior contracts, you know, this is a big thing in the UK at the moment. Kids start school in year whatever it is, and like you've got these 7-year-old kids sitting down with a piece of paper in front of them, and it says, I will be friendly, I will smile, I will listen to the teacher, I will sit in my seat, I will keep my hands to myself. All of those things are fine in principle, but put that in front of any child who doesn't know what those things mean for a start off. But put that in front of an autistic child and say, I will smile, you know, like you're basically just saying to them, I will pretend to be something that I'm not, and I will do that now for the rest of my life. And that's dangerous. And, you know, that's why you end up with kids with PTSD, because they've been masking for so long, and then the wheels come off. So the two things that I've found really helpful, because I don't want to just be like, it's so awful. The two things that I found really helpful, the two phrases that I kind of like hammered into, not really, but you know, three phrases actually that we laugh about in our house. So the first one is, when there's a question that we don't really know the answer for, we go with as a standard, because the patriarchy, and we find that that's pretty helpful rather than just because. So that's the first one. The second one is, my daughter knows what the phrase "my body, my choice" means. And that doesn't always work in my favor. So sometimes I will want her to wear something that I feel is smarter because we're going to meet family or whatever. And I've very many times had a throwback at me, "my body, my choice." And I'm like, oh God, okay then. But I feel like that's a good shortcut for her as an autistic young person. And if she remembers that, that will probably take care of some stuff when that nuance is not quite there for her. And the other thing that I have had to really work on myself, she's been out of school for 12 months, and when she was really struggling to attend, nearly every single professional I spoke to said things like, just bring her in, she'll be fine when she gets here, you know. And like, and I know I'm in many parenting groups for children who have attendance difficulties or barriers to attendance, and you know, and every morning the groups are full of parents saying, I got them in this morning, but it took me and 3 other teachers pulling their hands off the door and dragging them into the classroom, and they were kicking and screaming and blah. And that is a regular occurrence in our schools. You know, we have children who are, if you went to a job and when you got to the door of your job, you collapsed on the floor and begged people not to make you go in, someone would call occupational health. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. Or if kids were in school and saying things like, I don't want to go home, please don't make me go home, I hate being at home, someone would call social services. But for some reason, when it's school, it's like, oh, don't be silly, you'll be fine when you get in. So the phrase that I've had to really get used to hearing from my child and really listen to is, please don't make me do that. And I've taught her to be able to say that. And I have promised her that when she says it, I will listen. And sometimes she says it and it's not convenient. Sometimes she'll say, please don't force me to go in the supermarket with you. And I maybe want to buy her something that I wanted to try on. Or, you know, please don't make me walk the dog this morning, I don't feel so great. Or please turn the telly off. Or, you know, whatever it might be, you know. And I have really had to challenge myself around not doing what my mum did to me, not in a intentionally abusive way, which was, you know, it's what I say goes. I'm the adult, you'll listen, I know best, just because. And I've had to really work hard on being able to hear her say that. And it's not nice when your child says to you, please don't make me do that. But I think particularly when you're supporting neurodivergent kids, particularly around issues of consent and education, it's absolutely vital. And it's what will be the difference between them getting the support and not. Because I've had to sit in meetings and say, she won't be coming to school, what are you going to do about it to make it easier for her? Because it doesn't matter how many times you try to tell her to come and touch the gate, it's not going to happen. She'll agree to it today and it won't happen. Don't even ask for it. You know, so yeah, I guess they're the two phrases that I've found really helpful and quite challenging. My body, my choice, you know, and allowing your child to ask you, to tell you that they don't want to be forced to do something. Yeah, I hope that wasn't too long.
Thank you. That's just great. We're just coming up to 7 o'clock now, so we've been about an hour, which is what I thought we would be. And we've got about half an hour now to discuss amongst the four of us, and to invite the other people that are here with us in the room to discuss what's been thrown up, what the provocations have offered, and where we want to go with these. I can see there's a comment in the chat from Carrie saying, as a Steiner kid, is the issue the education system in the UK? Do you think a move towards different education models is better than training children how to speak about consent in the current education model? I can't speak to education systems in other countries. Maybe Heather has got a few words about this. But I am presently homeschooling my 9-year-old daughter, and I had no intention of doing that. But when the COVID lockdowns happened and the schools all shut, I saw her well-being improve epically because she wasn't going to school every day. She wasn't crying at the door or saying, I won't go, but she was so unhappy, and she's a lot happier presently. Now, I don't know if that's going to become a permanent arrangement, but we've opted out of the school system, at least for the duration of the high level of this pandemic, and she now goes to a forest school on a Tuesday with a few kids learning outside, different ages, very flexible and inclusive kind of learning. So those other kinds of approaches do happen in the UK, but the general state system of schooling is, as Heidi said, generally quite coercive. There are great teachers and great exceptions to the rule, but I think there's a lot of issues with the way we're schooled in the UK.
I think that there's something absolutely amazing teachers, and it isn't really about teachers, it's about the system. You know, that I don't believe that the UK education system is fit for purpose at all. I don't believe that I don't believe it's in any child's best interest to be learning in a class with 30 other children. It's, you know, I think it's kind of a bit of a chuck 'em all in and see what sticks job. And when you've got any children with any difference, be that disability or gender or identity or ethnicity, you know, they're so othered in those environments because of the way it's set up, that I just, you know, I would love to see an overhaul of education. I can't see it's coming anytime soon, but there's a lot of work to do, and that's why so many children, neurodivergent children, end up out of the system, because their parents realize that. And it's a case of, what do I choose? Do I choose sending them into that environment, or do I choose pulling them out and saving their mental health? You know, I think it is as bleak a decision as that sometimes. You know, and I say this as someone whose child is still on roll and it's still officially in mainstream education, but I think it would take such a massive turnaround. There's a huge ship to turn to steer in an opposite direction. It kind of, but I think those conversations about how we foster autonomy in our kids, and they're difficult conversations. You know, if you start empowering children to say things like, don't make me do that, you can't force me, in a class of 30 kids, it's pretty quickly going to get pretty tricky to teach them in the way that we teach them currently. So we have to be ready for a bit of a revolution if we're serious about it. But I don't see how else we can prepare our young people for adulthood without, it's like what we do to them in school, and then, like Heather was saying, then they hit adulthood, and even neurotypical kids have been programmed to behave in a particular way, and then you land in the workplace and you're like, whoa, you know, like there's not really there's no structure sometimes, you know, you're kind of struggling to work out power dynamics, you know, you're waiting for someone to tell you what to do, and all of the job applications say, you know, must be able to work on their own directive, but you've been in the school system for however many years, when it's all been about, I'll tell you what to do, you do it now. You know, I think we do need to find a way to empower our children, but it's going to be hard because it's difficult when people aren't coercible. You know, it's challenging when people don't do what you want them to do all the time.
Yes, which is why consent's revolutionary. Heather, I can see you kind of on the edge of your seat there trying to speak.
Yeah, I was struck by a few things that Heidi said when you were talking in line with this question. You know, one of them is, you know, one of the reasons that Scarleteen is how it is, which is that it's online, which is that somebody coming at all is up to them. What someone looks at all is up to them. How they engage with us, do they use our direct services and talk to us? Do they just read things? Is totally up to them. Is because, well, one, to avoid the situation that you're talking about, because I do think that even just limiting it to sex ed, so often there'll be one message being spoken about consent, but what is being modeled, even in the way that that is being delivered, is the complete opposite. You know, I don't actually do that much going into schools, in part because usually the conditions that I lay out for that, they are not into. Like, I'll say, I don't want anyone in there who doesn't want to be in there. I need for there to be a rule that if anyone's uncomfortable, they get to leave. I'm not going to ask anyone to do it. Like, nothing needs to be required. And you will be unsurprised to know how many environments that is absolutely unacceptable. Even when you say, you know, I'm not saying this just to be difficult, right? Like, there's a method to my not even remotely is this madness, right? Like, this is, if I'm explaining to someone the things that they need to do while I am doing none of them myself, one, they're not going to learn this, right? Because what we show people, I mean, this is, you know, I come from a Montessori background too. So this is baked in for me, in that what we actively show people is almost always more impactful than what we tell people, or what we give someone to read, or what the video is that they're there. All of those things could be aligned in their message, but if what we're actually doing is counter to that message, that's what sticks. And
That's the lesson, isn't it? That's the lesson.
Yeah. And again, that's for me all of education. I'm not a fan of compulsory education, you know, I mean, kind of all of this stuff, but certainly, especially with consent and sex ed, I find it just kind of particularly brain splody, the intense hypocrisy that's happening and the incredible mixed message that is often sent.
Mm-hmm.
There's a question in the chat, which by all means, Grainne, come in on that one, but you might also want to pick up on this question, which is, could you share more information and resources about how to teach young people to deal with rejection? And I know that that's a particular area of your expertise, but by all means also pick up on the previous point.
Sure, thanks. Yeah, I suppose the thing is that we have the model that we have at the moment of education, and it is sorely lacking our young people. And I think it's not just lacking in terms of consent education, it's lacking in terms of the breadth and the depth of the subject matters that people can decide to choose to study. We are so rigid in terms of what we decide is success when it comes to academic success or qualifications with our young people. So when it comes to consent, and I think, Heather, you're so right, like we have to teach consent in a consensual way. We have to walk the talk. We have to model it for our children and students. So if we're in a situation where we're walking into a classroom and we can see that half of them are there with their sort of the shoulders up and the arms crossed, and they really don't want to be there and they're feeling so uncomfortable, well, how is that showing consent in any way, shape or form? It's so not. So yeah, I agree. I think our education systems are entirely not fit for purpose. You know, it's this idea, I'm paraphrasing terribly, but you know, a fish isn't non-intelligent because it can't climb a tree. You know, we all have different levels of intelligence. We all have different skill sets. And our education system is just trying to produce, in a lot of respects, very homogenized versions of humanity. and it doesn't speak to anything in terms of individualism or autonomy or freedom of expression or creativity. And all of that said, there is a vast amount of people on this planet, and we have to, I suppose, in some ways find, you know, the best solutions with what we have at the moment, whilst also for sure working away at trying to find new, creative, better models in terms of educating our young people and training them for future life. And so there's a piece around the idea of having our young children understand too that there are some things that are within our domain in terms of our ability to have our opinions expressed and our opinions validated and our opinions upheld. And there are some things where, because of our structures within community, within society, within, you know, the etiquette that we conform to, that there are some things that we kind of have to conform to. So there is that thing, I think, of teaching our young people around that idea of, yeah, you may not particularly like this, you may be barely willing to, and we accept and respect you and acknowledge the fact that you're barely willing to do this, and we appreciate you being barely willing to do it. And also, yes, there are going to be things that you really want to. So it is that thing of that balance of, you know, you don't always get your own way all of the time, balanced with, but you have to be able to know that there are times when you do get your own way. Because we don't want, and I don't think it serves us as a society, to have a whole bunch of individuals who never consider anybody else's boundaries or anybody else's needs or wants or requirements. You know, we can't have, I suppose, a bunch of maybe 30-year-olds, and unfortunately with the class sizes that we have, there does need to be some element of, you know, these are the overall boundaries which we want you all to flow through in terms of how we act and interact with each other. So it's that challenge of having what seems like, unfortunately, the luxury of potentially every child going through something like the Steiner system, versus, which ideally, if we could all click our fingers, I'm sure we would want now, versus that thing of how do we, within the constraints of the current systems, find the best route to acknowledge that, yes, boundaries exist, you are entitled to your own, but, you know, for us all to get along easy peasy in this situation, we all need to maybe be at the edge of willing to on occasion, rather than being a full hell yes and wanting to on certain things.
And I think it's important as well within that is there's that thing of, you recognize what is required for you to be able to operate in the world. You recognize that there are requirements, boundaries, expectations, social norms. And you also are allowed to ask for the support that you need to be able to meet those expectations.
Yes, absolutely.
Rather than just be like, well, that's how it is, so just get on with it, you know?
Yeah. It is that acknowledgement, isn't it? It's like that, you know, that 2-year-old being squashed into the car seat when they don't want to go. It's like, I know you don't want to, and I'm so sorry that I'm making you, and I feel that you're upset, and I'm really sorry that you're upset about this. However, we have to go, we have to do this. So at the very least, the acknowledgement of the overstepping of boundaries, I think, is hugely important, because otherwise, if we don't acknowledge it, we're saying it doesn't matter in the first place.
Yeah.
I learned a great lesson about that from a friend of mine who is a dog trainer, and she trains dogs consensually. And she has a dog that hates going in the car. And she always asks her dog, will you get in the car? And if her dog says no, in the way that a dog can make it clear that they don't want to do that, she doesn't usually force the dog into the car. If the dog does go in the car, she rewards the dog, and she makes sure that she takes the dog in the car to nice places like lovely walks and happy experiences, and doesn't always put the dog in the car when they've got to go to the vet or some other horrible experience. And he described that as putting money in the consent bank. You know, that building up that trust, building up the thank you for doing that. I know you didn't want to, but it paid off and it was okay. It wasn't a trauma. Well done, brilliant, great, thank you. Means that the time that you have got to ask the kid to put the seatbelt on because your sibling is going to the doctor now, that little bit of coercion becomes slightly more acceptable because they trust you, that it really is that important this time, and that you won't force them again. And you know, and so that bit of sort of banking the trust, banking the consent, making sure that you're building up that relationship. It's not in this void, this black and white void of
being the safe adult, I think, is really important for your kids, you know. And there will be occasions when you'll be asking them to do something that they don't want to do, and it will be necessary. And the dentist is a really good example. You know, for a child with sensory difficulties, the dentist is a nightmare, until he has braces. So, because she had to have some teeth out. But she knows that she likes and trusts her dentist, and she knows that I'll be with her, and she knows that she's allowed to say, I need a break, you know. So it is that thing about, on occasion, you might need to say to your young person, I've got your back, I know you don't want to do this, and you can trust me, we're going to be okay. You know, I'll take care of you, I'll support you. There's a difference between that and just get in the chuffing car. Do you know what I mean? There's a huge difference in that.
So do you want me to say a little bit in terms of rejection? I don't, yeah, sure.
For the people that don't have your cameras on, that are here participating, by all means stick questions in the chat. We have about another 15 minutes. By all means also switch your camera on if you want to, but do remember we're recording, or otherwise indicate to me if you want to speak. You are free to put your camera on and speak to us. You don't have to stay hidden in your black box and just do it through the chat. It's up to you. Okay, Grainne, yeah, rejection.
Yeah, well, thanks, Heather. Heather, I think, probably has it all in one. Knowing how comprehensive her website is, it's probably everything you need to know about rejection is probably there on. Yeah.
There's several. There's a bunch of articles.
Brilliant, brilliant. Yeah, I mean, the way I suppose to look at consent is that, or rejection rather, is that again, being able to handle rejection and cope with rejection is again a hugely important life skill, because we are all rejected on a regular basis throughout our entire life. So the sooner we get a handle on being able to hear a no and to accept a no and honor a no, the better for all concerned. And again, for me, I suppose the better that we come to terms with rejection, the more likely we are to be brave and have the integrity to ask for what we want, because we're going to be able to understand and hear the no and to deal with it without feeling like our life is over and, you know, our self-esteem is flushed, you know. So I think, yeah, a hugely important thing is to teach children from an early age in a relatively structured way about the ability to deal with rejection, about the ability to deal with disappointment, because, you know, we all have disappointments in life. So yeah, I mean, in terms of resources, I'm automatically sending everybody to the Scarleteen website here from here on in. So thanks for that. But yeah, I just think that it is something that we need to look at in terms of particularly that fear of asking in the first place, because and I think it stymies so many of us in so many areas of our lives. We don't ask, we're afraid to ask because we're afraid to hear a no. So it stops us in terms of career progression. It stops us in terms of asking the person out that we might want to have to ask out. It stops us in terms of, you know, renegotiating where we're spending Christmas or Thanksgiving or whatever with, you know, that fear of hearing an answer that we don't want to hear it can be really restricting and self-sabotaging. So I do think that the practicing that thing of and also I suppose the flip side of it is not just about being able to hear a no and accept a no and to be able to move on from that no, but it's also about having the confidence of giving a no, because very often if you're taught to be the good girl or the good boy, the idea of saying no to somebody is entirely strange and awkward and uncomfortable, particularly if they're somebody you love or somebody you care for or you respect or think is fantastic. How do you say no to that person? How do you find a no, or even or say, no, I don't want to do that, but I'll maybe do that, and do a renegotiation with them. So, you know, for a young person who suddenly is being asked out by the person of their dreams, and that person is taking it to a level which they're not ready to go to, how do they find that self-esteem to be able to say, yeah, I think you're amazing, but I'm just not ready to go to there, you know, I'm not ready to go to A, but I might go to C with you or whatever. So there's I think a real necessity for us to talk more about rejection and the capacity to deal with that when it comes to consent awareness.
I'm a big fan of, I've told users that we've talked about it before, of like rejection exposure therapy. I realized in my early 20s, I accidentally did some. I wallpapered my apartment with all the rejection letters that I'd gotten from trying to get, and I think at first it was me just being miserable, but I did, just me being like, God, one more, I was like really sinking into being angry and miserable. But I think that the net impact, right, is that I like the bigger the wall was covered with the giant wall of rejection, the less of the impact that the giant wall of rejection had, and so I think to some degree, we've talked to them about it before, it's like some of it is you just get practice. Maybe you even intentionally ask things that you think it's likely that you're going to get a no to, so that it's less. I think some of it sometimes it's just the anticipation of the hard hit, and once you learn that it doesn't have to be that hard of a hit, and that you can take it, and that you're fine, and you learn whatever it is that you need to do for yourself around it. That's a big thing. But I also, Grainne, I think what you said about having the ability to say no is a really, really big deal. And I think that's another one. I think one of the tools that sometimes you can give young people, especially early on in relationships with any kind of intimacy, is for them to have a conversation with each other, to give each other permission to say no to the other one, to just say, hey, it's really important to me that if you say yes to me, you only say yes to me because you really want a thing. I don't want you to try and protect my feelings when you don't want to do something, so I can take care of myself. And to have those kinds of conversations, I think, matters a lot.
I've got one to add, which is I am fond of the expression that the thing about being able to say and hear a no is it makes a yes way more yesy.
Yeah.
A great example of that is the film Thelma and Louise. It's quite a well-known film. So Thelma's been through this horrific experience where she's been sexually violated, and she's on the run with Louise, and they pick up a hitchhiker who's played by Brad Pitt, who's very gorgeous and sexy. And she goes to a motel room with the Brad Pitt character, and they start snogging, and it's all getting hot. And then she goes, no, wait a minute. And he goes, oh, okay, and stops completely and hears her no and respects her no. And then she goes, come on, let's do it. And they get it on and they have a hot sex scene. And that fact that he went, okay, no problem, meant that she felt safe. Her no would be heard. She wasn't going to be violated, and she could enjoy this experience. And so I think not that particular example, but I'm sure there's ways there's ways to educate children and young people around that. A no doesn't necessarily mean that's the end of all the conversations and possibilities. It's actually about learning. Someone's trusting you to share their boundary with you and say, and that's a gift they're giving you, that no, because you know where that boundary is now, and you can operate knowing, okay, that's too far for you. I'll stay here, and you can continue the conversation, and that's so valuable.
I think as well, it's about helping our children to understand that when someone does say no, they're not saying no to you, they're saying no to the request or the thing that you're asking them about. And being able to, like, I kind of feel like everyone should do work experience in telesales just to get used to hearing people say no. Like, I did 9 months in telesales, and it, like, oh, what a character building experience that was, but you kind of like, and I think it's because when we're young, when children are young, and when like very small children go, no, don't say no to me, like we train it out, we force them out of situations where they want to scream no in our faces. We tell them that's not okay. We tell them that their no is rude, unacceptable. We do that with kids that are really young, and we do it because our parents did it to us and their parents did it to them, and we we don't let people say no. We think it's rude, and that's why I've been engaged 3 times. Because someone was nice to me and asked me to marry them, and so I said yes, because it would have been rude to say no.
I've just come out of a relationship with someone that was a pleaser, that found it hard to say no, and actually it's dishonest.
Yeah.
And I was being lied to because this person found it incredibly difficult to say no to anybody. And so it's so important. It's not a good thing to not say no. It's a good thank you for your no. Thank you for being honest with me. That's all I ever really want, is the authentic answer, regardless of whether it's yes or no. But there's a question in a private message to me. What would be the best way to start having consent conversations and cultivating consent culture in a country where such talks are rare, if indeed there are any? I'll say a country, or maybe also perhaps a culture or a religion, or some other kind of culture where talking about consent and presumably maybe talking about sex is taboo. How do we have these consent conversations?
I'll speak a little bit about that, simply because I don't know that it's necessarily at that end of the scale, but certainly Ireland has been quite conservative as a place in terms of our ability to talk about all things sex and sexuality and consent, of course, as a result. And for me, what I've noticed over the past few years, as we've been sort of growing up and out as a country and sort of gaining that confidence, is that really it's sort of the ripple effect that really is what works best, in that, having small conversations, having, workshops with groups of people who are interested and curious, and allowing the knowledge to sort of spread in that way really seems to work quite effectively. It's unlikely in those contexts that you're going to be able to walk straight into your Department of Education and say, you know what, this is how we need to teach consent around here, or to walk straight into into the government and say, this is how we need our laws and legislations to be written. But I think it's sort of a case of sort of slowly but surely creating as many situations, as many conversations as possible in as many different contexts and in as many different sort of areas of society as possible. I don't know that I have a whole lot more to say around that, but I do think that it's a challenge, because I think consent even is considered a dangerous topic or a difficult topic, even though it's supposed to be about people being in agreement. There are certainly some people who would be on the more conservative end of things, who would see that any conversation at all that relates to people having an opinion or having bodily autonomy, is a revolutionary act. So, there are certainly challenges around that, but I think sort of spreading the conversations as far and as wide as possible is one way to go.
I've certainly found that when I say that I'm going to talk about consent, there are a bunch of people that switch off and they assume that the conversation is going to be about sex, which it isn't always. Sometimes it is, but a lot of times it isn't. My mum, I'm posting on Facebook all the time about this consent festival, and my mum's going, I'm not looking at any of that. It's not for me. Of course it's for my mum, it's for everyone, but she doesn't want to hear her daughter talking about sex. It's like not comfortable for her. So I think separating it out from sex and using other examples is something that I found really useful, certainly when I'm talking with young people around the stuff that you were talking about, Grainne, about wanting and willing to, being in enthusiastic yes, in okay yes and no. I use pizza as an analogy for that. Let's make a pizza together. What do you want on your pizza? What will you have on your pizza? And what you won't have on your pizza? And can you make a pizza together? Because if it's on someone's won't list, it's not going on the pizza. And so you can talk about it with different examples.
And a step back from that, do you like pizza?
Having made a pizza, you're under no obligation to eat any.
Yeah.
You want to share it with someone else, and that's okay if everyone's consenting. you don't have to eat the same pizza every day. Full pizza autonomy, yeah.
What I think is really important about that conversation around when you're the person in a community or a group or a work setting or a culture, and you're trying to have the conversation, you want to have the conversation about consent, and it feels like that's rubbing up against the status quo, and that is not something people want to hear, and you're finding it difficult to engage in. I think in terms of for you personally, it's really important to have a support network, some cheerleaders, some people who are on the same page as you. Seek out other people who are interested in that, and seek out other people who can support you, so that when you're going into those environments and you feel like you're the only person having that conversation, when you come out, you've got someone to go, God, I bet that was hard, well done, you did great, even if you haven't got them standing alongside you. And I think particularly in family situations, when you've got a family who are maybe not on the same page as you around those conversations. I'm thinking about, again, relating back to our story, I've got people in my family who would rather that I just let's not talk about autism, it's too tricky, there's nothing wrong with her. I didn't say there's anything wrong with her, I said she's autistic. Do you know what I mean? But you need people on your team who are your people, who are your tribe, who are your cheerleaders. And if they're not in the room with you, you need to be able to go to a room where they are, where you're safe, to give you that support.
The personal is political. So your sphere of influence is, first of all, your conversation with your own self, and what you give yourself permission to do, where your own ethics sit, then with the people closest to you, and then wherever it goes from there. And it could be the whole world, or it could just be your next door neighbour or your own kid or whatever.
And a really good way to practice consent is for you to be curating your circle, and for you to be establishing your boundaries with different people. And just because someone is a close family member, that doesn't mean they get to be right in your ear all the time. You can decide that, with my clients, I often talk about putting people in different fields, and you can move them from your near field right out to your far field, and they don't need to know about that. And you're just like, imagine you're picking them up like a chess piece, and you're just moving them, and you're deciding that you're not going to engage in however that feels safe for you. And that's as much about consent as anything else. Who am I allowing to be in my intimate space, whether that's physically or emotionally or mentally? Who am I giving permission to be in my space?
There's also there's political idea of the spectrum of allies. That often when we are trying to deal with a social issue, we're the people over here arguing with the people over there, and going, no, you're wrong and I'm right with each other, and ignoring all the people here who are almost on our side, or who could go moving that way a bit more. We could just open up the conversation and be curious and show some empathy, instead of going, you're wrong, I'm right. That's influence. I'm just aware that it's just gone 7:30, and I'm going to wind up the session pretty soon. I want to thank all of the panelists who've been completely amazing and given us so much inspiration. Thank you so much to Heather, Grainne and Heidi. And thank you to all of the people on the Zoom that have offered comments. It's been brilliant. I am going to switch off the recording now, and I'm going to keep this meeting open for about another 10 minutes in case anybody wants to continue the conversation. I'm going to switch off the recording now.